Do you remember New Year's Eve traditions? When midnight felt like magic instead of a deadline? Everyone gathered around one television, choosing between Guy Lombardo's Elegant Orchestra or Dick Clark's Electric Countdown.
The other side of the office.
But it shouldn't take me.
While your grandmother gently carried out the black-eyed peas she had been soaking since dawn. In 1970s, 30 traditions made New Year's Eve sacred. Today, most families keep 3. Number 17 will break your heart. Tonight, we preserve all 30 before the last generation who celebrated this way dies. Let's start with number 1. Walk into any 1970s household on December 31st afternoon, and you'd hear the phone ringing constantly as the neighborhood phone tree activated. Women called each other in predetermined order, confirming who was bringing what time everyone would gather, and whether the weather would affect plans. This coordination tradition cost nothing but required social organization that modern group texts have eliminated. Each woman had a list of 3 to 5 others she was responsible for contacting, creating a web of communication that ensured everyone knew the plan without a single person making 30 calls. The phone tree wasn't just logistics. It was community maintenance disguised as party planning, ensuring that every family felt included and that no one spent New Year's Eve alone because they didn't get the message. Every southern household and many northern ones started New Year's Eve morning by setting dried black-eyed peas to soak in large bowls of water. This overnight soaking tradition prepared the peas for New Year's Day cooking and announced to anyone entering the kitchen that this family observed proper traditions. The soaking required planning. You couldn't decide at 10 p.m. to make black-eyed peas for luck. The peas needed 12 hours minimum, teaching children that some traditions required forethought and that you couldn't rush rituals that connected you to your ancestors. Grandmothers inspected the soaking peas throughout the day, removing any that floated, a sign they were hollow and bad, and ensuring the water stayed clear. That attention to detail separated families who merely cooked black-eyed peas from families who understood the tradition. On December 31st afternoon, mothers and daughters set the dining room table with the good china, crystal glasses, and silver that spent the rest of the year wrapped in felt. This formal table-setting tradition transformed ordinary dining rooms into elegant spaces worthy of the year's most important meal. The setting took hours. Each piece had to be washed first, even though it had been stored clean, arranged according to formal dining rules that mothers taught daughters, and positioned perfectly so the table looked magazine-worthy. The good china wasn't just dishes. It was visible proof that your family valued tradition enough to use the expensive things, that New Year's Eve warranted the same formality as Thanksgiving, and that celebration required effort beyond just showing up. Beauty parlors across America stayed open late on December 31st as women rushed to get their hair set, teased, and sprayed into elaborate styles that would last through midnight. This beautification tradition cost $3 to $5 and required appointments made weeks in advance because every woman wanted fresh hair for New Year's Eve. The beauty parlor visit wasn't vanity, it was ritual preparation that marked the transition from ordinary day to special evening. Women sat under dryers reading magazines, discussing their evening plans with other women, and emerging transformed with hair that announced they'd made proper effort. Teenagers getting their first New Year's Eve beauty parlor appointment marked a coming-of-age moment that signaled they were old enough to participate in adult celebrations. Suburban neighborhoods organized progressive dinners where families moved from house to house throughout the evening, eating appetizers at one home, salad at another, main course at a third, and dessert at a fourth. This coordinated tradition required weeks of planning and perfect timing so everyone arrived at each house together. The progressive dinner cost each family about $10 for their course, but created an evening of movement and variety that kept children engaged and adults socializing. Families dressed formally and walked through cold winter streets between houses, creating memories of laughter and community that single-location parties couldn't match. 5 traditions down, and you're seeing the preparation. Phone trees, coordinating plans. Black-eyed peas have been soaking since morning.
They converse pleasantly while Dad serves. I said pleasantly, for that is the keynote at dinner time.
Good china being washed and arranged. Beauty parlor appointments kept. Neighborhood dinners require perfect timing. Families were event planners, understanding that celebration required coordination, not just showing up. 25 more traditions reveal the complete evening. Every family had to declare their television loyalty before 8 p.m. Would they watch Guy Lombardo on CBS or Dick Clark on ABC? This choice tradition sparked genuine debates because watching both was impossible with only one television. And the decision revealed your family's values about tradition versus modernity. Guy Lombardo represented old-school elegance. His Royal Canadians Orchestra played at the Waldorf Astoria, and his broadcast featured formal ballroom dancing, champagne toasts, and the kind of sophistication your grandparents remembered from their youth. Children were required to dress formally for New Year's Eve. Boys in suits or dress pants with ties, girls in party dresses with patent leather shoes. This clothing tradition cost families $20 to $50 for new outfits purchased specifically for the holiday, and announced that New Year's Eve warranted the same formality as Easter or Christmas. Mothers spent December 31st afternoon ironing dress shirts, polishing shoes, and ensuring every child looked presentable. The preparation included hair washing, nail trimming, and the kind of grooming attention that only happened for major holidays. The formal dress code wasn't about showing off. It was about teaching children that some occasions demanded special effort. Teenagers often rebelled against the dress code, wanting to wear jeans and casual clothes that matched what they saw on Dick Clark's broadcast. These conflicts revealed generational tensions about formality and tradition, but those photos now serve as evidence that families once treated New Year's Eve as an occasion worthy of effort and formality. Fathers taught teenage children how to properly open champagne bottles during the afternoon of December 31st, practicing with the cheap bottle before attempting the good champagne at midnight. This educational tradition prevented accidents and ensured that the midnight toast wouldn't be ruined by champagne spraying across the ceiling. The practice session happened in the garage or backyard, where mess didn't matter. Fathers demonstrated the proper grip, the correct angle, the gentle twist that released pressure gradually rather than explosively. Teenagers learned that opening champagne was a skill requiring patience and technique. The tradition wasn't just about champagne, it was about fathers teaching children adult skills, about the passage of responsibility from one generation to the next, and about ensuring that important moments weren't ruined by incompetence. The tradition taught that adult celebrations required adult skills, that practice prevented embarrassment, and that some knowledge could only be passed through demonstration rather than explanation. Mothers spent December 31st afternoon assembling elaborate snack tables featuring specific 1970s foods: Ritz crackers with spray cheese, Triscuits with port wine cheese ball, celery with pimento cheese, deviled eggs, shrimp cocktail, and Swedish meatballs in the slow cooker. This food preparation tradition cost $15 to $25 and required recipes that could sit at room temperature for hours without spoiling. The snack table wasn't random. It followed unwritten rules about what foods were appropriate for New Year's Eve. Casual foods like chips and dip appeared at regular parties, but New Year's Eve demanded elevated snacks that showed effort and sophistication. The cheese ball, rolled in chopped pecans and shaped into a perfect sphere, served as the centerpiece that announced the hostess had made proper effort. Families with young children created fake midnight countdowns at 9 p.m., complete with noisemakers, hats, and champagne, actually ginger ale in champagne glasses. This early celebration tradition allowed children to participate in the ritual without staying up past bedtime and taught them the structure of New Year's Eve before they were old enough for the real midnight event. Parents committed fully to the deception. They changed clocks, dimmed lights to suggest lateness, and counted down with the same enthusiasm they'd show at actual midnight. Children believed they were staying up late, experiencing the thrill of breaking bedtime rules while actually maintaining their sleep schedules. The fake countdown required coordination. Both parents had to remember which time was real and which was performance, and older siblings had to be convinced to participate in the deception rather than spoiling it for younger children. The tradition created family memories of children in party hats, blowing noisemakers at 9 p.m., convinced they'd stayed up until midnight. Those children later discovered the deception, but appreciated the effort their parents made to include them in celebration before they were old enough for the real thing. 10 traditions down, halfway through the evening, Dick Clark debates. Formal dress codes enforced, champagne opening practiced, snack tables assembled with precision, children's fake countdowns at 9. Families were theater directors, staging elaborate celebrations, requiring afternoon preparation and perfect execution. 20 more traditions complete the night. Every family rearranged their living room furniture on December 31st afternoon to create space for dancing, conversation circles, and the television viewing area. This spatial reorganization tradition required moving heavy sofas, rolling up rugs, and creating a party space from an ordinary living room. Fathers and teenage sons moved furniture while mothers directed placement, creating conversation areas near the snack table, dance space near the stereo, and television viewing arranged so everyone could see the broadcast. The rearrangement took an hour and transformed the familiar living room into special occasions space. The rolled-up rug was essential. It protected the carpet from spills and created a dance floor that allowed for the kind of movement that regular carpeted floors prevented. Families stored the rug in the garage or basement, knowing they'd need to roll it back out on January 1st. The furniture rearrangement announced to children that this evening was different, that normal rules about where you could sit and what you could do in the living room were suspended for this one night. The transformed space created permission for celebration that ordinary room arrangement didn't allow. Some families went further, moving the television from its usual corner to a central position where everyone could gather around it for the countdown. This television repositioning required disconnecting and reconnecting the antenna, adjusting the rabbit ears, and ensuring the picture quality remained good in the new location. The tradition taught children that celebration sometimes required physical transformation of space, that creating special occasions demanded effort beyond just deciding to have a party, and that the same room could serve different purposes when properly arranged. Suburban neighborhoods coordinated their New Year's Eve schedules so that someone was always home on each block, creating an informal security network that allowed families to party without worrying about break-ins. This safety tradition required phone calls and agreements about who would stay home until what time, creating a rotation that protected the entire neighborhood. The coordination happened through the afternoon phone tree, with women confirming that the Johnsons would be home until 9 p.m., the Smiths until 10 p.m., and the Martins all night because they were hosting. This staggered schedule meant that no block was ever completely empty, reducing the risk that became a concern when everyone left for parties simultaneously. Families who stayed home early in the evening received reciprocal protection later. The Johnsons, who hosted an early dinner party ending at 9 p.m., could then leave, knowing the Smiths were now home and watching. This mutual protection system required trust and coordination that modern security systems have replaced, but that created community bonds that technology can't match. The tradition revealed that neighborhoods functioned as extended families who looked out for each other, that celebration didn't mean abandoning responsibility, and that community safety was a collective effort requiring coordination and trust. Teenage boys were sometimes recruited to drive through the neighborhood periodically, checking that everything looked normal and reporting back to their parents. This responsibility taught them that community membership included obligations, that celebration came with duties, and that being trusted with neighborhood safety was a mark of maturity. Families gathered in the living room before dinner for the formal resolution writing ceremony, where each person wrote their New Year's resolutions on nice paper using good pens, then read them aloud to the family. This accountability tradition created public commitment that made resolutions harder to abandon and taught children that goal setting was a family value. Mothers provided special stationery, often leftover Christmas cards or nice notepaper, and fathers distributed pens, creating a formal atmosphere that announced this wasn't casual list-making but serious commitment. Children as young as 6 participated, with parents helping them articulate age-appropriate goals. The resolutions had to be specific and measurable. Be better wasn't acceptable, but read 1 book per month or save $5 weekly demonstrated proper goal setting. Parents used the ceremony to teach children about realistic planning, the difference between wishes and commitments, and how to break large goals into achievable steps. After everyone read their resolutions aloud, mothers collected the papers and stored them in a special envelope that would be opened on December 31st of the following year. This one-year accountability cycle created anticipation and consequence. You knew you'd have to face your family and admit whether you'd achieved your goals. The tradition created family memories of ambitious resolutions that were never achieved and modest goals that were exceeded, teaching children that setting goals mattered more than perfect achievement, that family support helped maintain commitment, and that public accountability strengthened resolve. Some families added consequences and rewards. Children who achieved their resolutions earned special privileges or small monetary rewards. Families observed a strict hierarchy about who gave toasts and in what order, creating a formal structure that honored age, family position, and social status. This protocol tradition required everyone to understand their place in the family structure and wait for their turn to speak, teaching children about respect and social order. The eldest male, usually the grandfather or father, gave the first toast at midnight, offering wishes for health, prosperity, and happiness in the new year. His toast was brief but formal, using phrases passed down through generations and creating connection to family history. The eldest female, grandmother or mother, gave the second toast, typically focusing on family unity, gratitude for the past year, and hopes for continued togetherness. Her toast was often more emotional than the male toast, acknowledging challenges overcome and expressing love for the gathered family. Younger adults gave subsequent toasts in order of age, with each person expected to say something meaningful rather than just Happy New Year. The pressure to give a good toast created anxiety for those who weren't comfortable with public speaking, but the tradition demanded participation. Children were allowed to give toasts after all adults had spoken, with parents coaching them on appropriate content. These children's toasts were often memorized phrases, "May the new year bring happiness," that demonstrated they understood the ritual, even if they couldn't create original content. Every family maintained a list of relatives and close friends who had to be called at 12:01 a.m., creating a post-midnight phone marathon that sometimes lasted an hour. This communication tradition cost money. Long-distance calls were expensive, but maintained family connections across geographic distances and ensured that no one felt forgotten on New Year's. Mothers prepared the phone call list during the afternoon, writing out names in order of priority and including phone numbers, so no time would be wasted looking them up at midnight. The list typically included grandparents, adult siblings who lived far away, close friends who'd moved, and godparents or other significant family connections. The tradition created phone line congestion that made getting through difficult. Families sometimes tried for 15 minutes to reach someone whose line was constantly busy, creating frustration that was accepted as part of the ritual. Getting through on the first try was considered lucky and suggested the recipient wasn't very popular since their phone wasn't busy. Long-distance calls cost significantly more at night, but New Year's was considered worth the expense. Families budgeted for the phone bill that would arrive in mid-January, knowing it would be higher than usual, but accepting that maintaining family connections justified the cost. 15 traditions down, and you're witnessing complete evening choreography. Furniture moved for dancing, neighborhoods coordinating security, resolution ceremonies before dinner, Dick Clark drinking games after children sleep, midnight phone marathons connecting families across distances. Families were event managers orchestrating celebration, requiring planning, coordination, and commitment. 15 more traditions reveal the midnight climax. Hosts distributed noisemakers to every guest before 11:30 p.m., ensuring everyone had proper equipment for the midnight celebration. This preparation tradition required purchasing dozens of party horns, rattles, and clappers that cost about $10 total, and announced that this household took New Year's celebration seriously. The noisemakers came in standard varieties: paper horns that unrolled when blown, plastic rattles filled with beads, wooden clappers that made sharp cracking sounds, and metal horns that produced loud, sustained notes. Hosts purchased mixed packs from party supply stores, creating variety that ensured the midnight noise would be chaotic and celebratory rather than monotonous. Children received their noisemakers early and were strictly forbidden from using them before midnight. This prohibition created anticipation and taught delayed gratification. The noisemakers sat on the coffee table, visible and tempting, while children were warned that early use would result in confiscation. The distribution process included demonstration. Hosts showed guests how each noisemaker worked, ensuring that midnight wouldn't be disrupted by people fumbling with unfamiliar equipment. This preparation prevented the awkward moment of silent midnight because no one knew how to operate their noisemaker. The tradition created a crescendo of noise at midnight that could be heard throughout the neighborhood, with every house contributing to a collective celebration that announced the new year had arrived. The noise lasted several minutes, with people continuing to blow horns and shake rattles until their arms tired and their voices grew hoarse from shouting. This is the tradition the hook promised would show you what community meant before text messages. 6 neighboring households coordinated to open their front doors simultaneously at exactly midnight, creating a neighborhood-wide celebration where families stood in doorways, shouted "Happy New Year" across lawns, and created collective noise that announced community celebration. This coordination tradition required afternoon phone calls to synchronize watches and agree on the exact countdown source. Would everyone count down with Guy Lombardo, Dick Clark, or the local radio station? The synchronization was critical because the magic of the tradition depended on all 6 households opening their doors at the same moment. Families who were even 30 seconds off missed the collective shout. and felt embarrassed that they'd gotten the timing wrong. Each household assigned someone to watch the clock and signal when to move to the door. At 11:58, families gathered in their foyers, putting on coats because January cold would rush in when doors opened. At 11:59:30, hands went to doorknobs. At 11:59:50, everyone took positions. At midnight exactly, 6 doors opened simultaneously. The moment of opening created a rush of cold air, a burst of noise from 6 households shouting simultaneously, and a visual spectacle of neighbors visible in lit doorways across the dark street. Children ran into front yards, adults waved from doorsteps, and for 60 seconds, the entire neighborhood was connected in collective celebration. The tradition required trust. You had to believe your neighbors would actually participate, that you wouldn't be the only family standing in your doorway looking foolish. This mutual commitment created bonds that extended beyond New Year's into year-round neighborhood relationships. Families lit sparklers in their driveways or front yards at 12:05 a.m., creating a fire display that marked the new year and gave children something exciting to do immediately after midnight. This pyrotechnic tradition cost about $5 for a box of sparklers and required adult supervision to prevent burns and fires. Fathers distributed sparklers to children and guests, lighting them from a single candle or lighter and creating a chain of fire that spread through the group. The sparklers burned for about 60 seconds, creating bright white light and showering sparks that children tried to write their names with in the air. The tradition required safety rules. Sparklers had to be held at arm's length, away from faces and clothing. Children had to stand in open areas, away from cars and houses. Used sparklers had to be dropped into a bucket of water, rather than thrown on the ground where they could start fires. The sparkler ceremony created photo opportunities that parents captured with Polaroid cameras, preserving images of children holding fire, faces lit by bright sparks, expressions of joy and excitement visible in the flash. These photos filled family albums, marking each year's celebration with similar but slightly different images as children grew. The tradition ended in many areas as fire regulations tightened and sparklers became harder to purchase, but for 1970s families, the sparkler ceremony was as essential to New Year's as the midnight countdown itself. Spent the hour after midnight packaging leftovers for guests to take home, creating a distribution system that ensured no food was wasted and that guests left with tangible evidence of the evening's abundance. This generosity tradition required purchasing aluminum foil and plastic containers specifically for this purpose and demonstrated that good hosting extended beyond the party itself. The packaging was strategic. Each guest received a balanced selection of leftovers, not just the foods that hadn't been popular. Hosts divided deviled eggs, sliced remaining cheese ball, portioned Swedish meatballs, and created individual servings that guests could heat and eat the next day. The tradition reflected Depression-era values about waste. Throwing away food was unconscionable, but keeping all leftovers yourself was selfish. Distributing leftovers solved both problems while extending the celebration into the next day as guests ate the packaged food and remembered the party. Children received their own small packages of treats, cookies, candies, special snacks, creating excitement about going home and giving them something to eat during the car ride. This children's package prevented the post-party meltdown that often occurred when overtired children left fun environments. The packaging ritual created a final social interaction as guests waited for their leftovers, thanked hosts, and said extended goodbyes that sometimes lasted 30 minutes. These prolonged departures were accepted as part of the tradition, with no one rushing guests out the door, even though hosts were exhausted. Before midnight, mothers finalized their New Year's Day menu, ensuring they had all ingredients for the traditional meal that would be served within 12 hours. This advance planning tradition prevented the chaos of discovering missing ingredients on a day when most stores were closed and demonstrated the kind of forward thinking that characterized successful hosting. The New Year's Day menu followed strict traditions: black-eyed peas for luck, greens for money, cornbread for gold, and pork for prosperity. Mothers verified they had every ingredient, that the black-eyed peas were soaking properly, that the greens were washed and ready, that the cornbread mix was in the pantry. The planning included timing calculations: when to start cooking so everything would be ready by 2 p.m., how long each dish required, what could be prepared in advance, and what had to be cooked fresh. Mothers wrote out schedules that mapped the entire cooking process, ensuring nothing would be forgotten in the post-party exhaustion. The tradition taught children that celebration extended across multiple days, that each holiday had its specific foods and rituals, and that proper hosting required thinking beyond the immediate party to what came next. The menu planning also demonstrated that traditions had rules. You couldn't serve just any food on New Year's Day and claim you were following tradition. Some mothers prepared as much as possible on December 31st afternoon, cooking greens and cornbread in advance, so New Year's Day cooking would be minimal. This advance preparation allowed them to enjoy their own party rather than worrying about the next day's meal. 20 traditions down, past midnight now, noisemakers distributed precisely. 6 households opening doors simultaneously, sparklers lit in driveways, leftovers packaged for guests. Tomorrow's menu is planned before today ends. Families were choreographers, understanding that celebration required coordination across time, space, and community. 10 more traditions complete the night. This is the tradition that defined 1970s New Year's Eve for adults and revealed how families balanced celebration with responsibility before drunk driving became socially unacceptable. Adult partygoers created drinking games around Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve broadcast, taking drinks when specific phrases were said. Certain camera angles appeared, or predictable moments occurred. This structured drinking tradition turned passive television watching into interactive entertainment and created the kind of adult fun that happened after children went to bed. The rules varied by household and friend group, but common triggers included: drink when Dick Clark said "rockin'," drink when the ball appeared on screen, drink when Dick Clark interviewed someone who was obviously drunk, and finish your drink when the countdown began. These rules created a game that paced drinking throughout the evening rather than encouraging rapid consumption. The tradition required preparation. Someone had to write out the rules, everyone had to agree on what counted as a trigger, and the host had to ensure adequate alcohol supply. Beer was the standard drink because it allowed for frequent sipping without rapid intoxication, though some groups used wine or mixed drinks. The drinking game revealed generational attitudes about alcohol that seem shocking now. Drunk driving was common and socially acceptable, with hosts often encouraging guests to sleep it off on couches rather than drive home, but not preventing them from driving if they insisted. The phrase "one for the road" appeared frequently, with hosts offering a final drink to departing guests, even when those guests were clearly impaired. Women participated in the drinking games, but typically drank less than men, reflecting 1970s gender norms. A woman who matched male drinking pace for pace was considered unfeminine and potentially problematic, while a woman who abstained completely was considered uptight and no fun. This narrow, acceptable range created pressure that many women navigated by nursing a single drink all evening while pretending to participate. The game created bonding among adults who shared the experience of watching for triggers, laughing when everyone drank simultaneously, and building the kind of collective memory that comes from shared ritual. The next day's phone calls often included comparisons of how many drinks each person had consumed and jokes about who had gotten most drunk. The tradition ended in the 1980s as drunk driving awareness campaigns made the casual attitude toward impaired driving socially unacceptable. Mothers Against Drunk Driving, MAD, formed in 1980. And within a few years, the drinking games that had been standard New Year's Eve entertainment became embarrassing relics of a less responsible era. But the tradition revealed something important about 1970s celebration culture: that adults needed structured entertainment beyond just conversation, that television provided the framework for social interaction, and that alcohol consumption was central to how adults marked special occasions. The drinking game wasn't about getting drunk. It was about creating a shared experience that made passive television watching into active participation. Single adults at parties participated in the Midnight Kiss assignment, where hosts paired up unattached guests for the traditional midnight kiss. This matchmaking tradition created awkward but memorable moments and reflected 1970s attitudes about romance and social engineering that would be considered inappropriate today. Hosts made the assignments during the evening, observing which single guests seemed compatible and announcing the pairings around 11:45 p.m. The assignments were presented as fun tradition rather than serious matchmaking, but everyone understood that hosts were hoping sparks might fly. The tradition created pressure on single guests who might not be attracted to their assigned partner but felt obligated to participate in the ritual. Refusing to kiss your assigned partner was considered rude and antisocial, marking you as uptight and no fun. This social pressure overrode personal comfort in ways that modern consent culture would reject, and that participating in group rituals mattered more than individual comfort. These values would shift dramatically in coming decades as consent culture emerged. Families with slide projectors created year-in-review slideshows that played during the evening, showing highlights from the past 12 months and creating nostalgia for the year that was ending. This documentation tradition required organizing slides throughout the year, selecting the best images, and creating a narrative that captured the family's story. Fathers typically operated the projector, advancing slides manually with the clicking mechanism. The slideshow lasted 20 to 30 minutes and included major events: vacations, birthdays, holidays, graduations, as well as ordinary moments that had become meaningful in retrospect. Teenagers often groaned at embarrassing photos, but secretly enjoyed seeing themselves documented and valued enough to be included in the family's official history. Adults used the slideshow to remember moments they'd forgotten completely. The projector had to be focused properly, or everything would be blurry. The images on screen became artifacts of a time that was ending, making the past year feel simultaneously recent and distant. Moments that had seemed ordinary when they happened: a backyard barbecue, a trip to the beach, a birthday cake, became precious when viewed as part of a year that was disappearing forever. The tradition also created pressure to document the coming year adequately, with families mentally noting that they needed to take more photos at certain events or capture moments they'd missed this year. The slideshow became both celebration of the past and blueprint for the future, showing what the family valued and wanted to remember about their time together. The newspaper preservation families saved the December 31st newspaper to be opened and read on December 31st of the following year, creating a time capsule that would reveal what had seemed important 1 year earlier. This documentation tradition cost nothing but required remembering to save the paper and to retrieve it exactly 1 year later. Mothers typically handled the preservation, wrapping the newspaper in plastic and storing it somewhere it wouldn't be accidentally thrown away or damaged during spring cleaning or basement reorganization. The location had to be memorable: a closet shelf, The attic, a basement storage box labeled specifically for this purpose, because finding the paper 1 year later was essential to the tradition working properly. Families bundled in winter coats and gathered in front yards or on porches at midnight, creating outdoor celebration that allowed them to hear neighborhood noise and feel part of a larger community celebration. This exposure tradition was uncomfortable. January cold was brutal, but created shared experience that indoor celebration couldn't match. The outdoor gathering lasted only a few minutes, but those minutes created powerful memories of cold air, visible breath, distant sounds of celebration from other neighborhoods, and the sense of being part of something larger than just your family's party. The discomfort of the cold made the return indoors feel like a reward, with warm houses seeming extra cozy after exposure to winter weather. Children found the outdoor gathering exciting because it broke normal rules about staying inside when it was cold, because it allowed them to make noise without being shushed, and because it created a sense of adventure that indoor celebration lacked. The permission to be loud and energetic outdoors released pent-up excitement that had been building all evening. The tradition revealed that celebration sometimes required discomfort, that the best memories often involved elements of challenge or difficulty, and that community connection mattered enough to endure cold weather. The outdoor gathering also created natural transition from the midnight climax back to calmer indoor activities. Toast hierarchies honored, midnight kisses assigned, newspapers preserved for next year. Families gathering outdoors despite bitter cold. Families were ritual keepers, understanding that tradition required following rules, honoring hierarchy, and accepting discomfort. Singing every family and party sang Auld Lang Syne at midnight, creating a musical tradition that connected them to celebrations happening simultaneously across the nation. This communal singing required knowing the words, or at least the first verse, and participating even if you couldn't carry a tune. The song began immediately after the countdown ended, with everyone joining hands in a circle and swaying while singing. The hand-holding created physical connection that reinforced the emotional bonds of the moment, with the circle formation ensuring everyone was included and visible. Arms crossed in front of bodies, right hand holding the left hand of the person on your right, left hand holding the right hand of the person on your left, creating an interlocking chain of connection. Most people only knew the first verse and the chorus, mumbling through the rest while hoping no one noticed their lack of knowledge. But the mumbling didn't matter. The tradition was about participation, not perfect performance. The few people who knew all the words sang loudly, carrying the melody for those who were faking it through verses about old acquaintances and taking cups of kindness. The song's Scottish origins and archaic language meant that most singers didn't fully understand what they were singing about or what Auld Lang Syne actually meant, but the tradition persisted because it connected them to generations of previous New Year's celebrations. Grandparents remembered singing the same song as children in the 1920s and 1930s. Parents remembered learning it from their parents in the 1950s. Children were learning it now in the 1970s, creating a chain of tradition that stretched back decades and would continue forward into future generations. The swaying motion synchronized the group physically, with everyone moving together in rhythm. Some circles swayed gently while others moved dramatically, lifting arms high and bending low. The physical coordination required attention and cooperation, making the singing more than just vocal performance, but embodied ritual involving whole bodies moving in unison. The singing lasted about 2 minutes and ended with everyone shouting "Happy New Year" and hugging the people next to them in the circle. This final group hug created a moment of collective warmth before the party began to wind down. Strangers hugged like old friends. Family members embraced with genuine affection. The circle dissolved into smaller clusters of people, wishing each other well, exchanging kisses and handshakes, and beginning the slow process of transitioning from celebration back to normal life. The tradition ensured that midnight wasn't just a moment marked by noise and champagne, but also by song that connected everyone present to each other and to larger traditions spanning generations and geography. This is the tradition that closed the evening for families who'd remained loyal to Guy Lombardo throughout the night, and it revealed what celebration meant to the generation that had lived through World War II and the Depression. Guy Lombardo's Royal Canadians always ended their broadcast with a waltz, usually the anniversary waltz, or the Blue Danube, creating a final dance that allowed married couples to hold each other close and reflect on the year passing and the year beginning. This romantic tradition required knowing how to waltz, which most adults over 40 did, because ballroom dancing had been standard social education for their generation. Fathers led mothers around living rooms that had been cleared for dancing, creating graceful movements that children watched with fascination. The waltz was slower and more formal than the earlier dancing, creating a mood of reflection and intimacy that contrasted with the earlier celebration's energy. Children watched their parents dance and saw them as romantic figures rather than just authority figures or service providers. The waltz revealed that their parents had a relationship that existed independent of parenting, that they had chosen each other and continued to choose each other, and that marriage was supposed to include romance and affection. The tradition taught children what marriage should look like, partners who still wanted to hold each other after years together, who could move in synchronized harmony, who found joy in each other's presence. These lessons about partnership and commitment were delivered through demonstration rather than lecture, making them more powerful than any words could be. The waltz also revealed generational divides in celebration styles. Younger couples often didn't know how to waltz, having grown up with rock and roll rather than ballroom dancing. They watched older couples with a mixture of admiration and amusement, recognizing the beauty of the tradition while also feeling that it belonged to a different era. Some younger couples attempted to waltz, stumbling through the steps and laughing at their incompetence. These attempts created bonding moments between generations as older couples coached younger ones, teaching the basic box step and demonstrating how to lead and follow. The impromptu dance lessons created connections that transcended age differences. The waltz ended with Guy Lombardo's signature sign-off, "Good night, sleep tight, and pleasant dreams to you all." This phrase became so associated with New Year's Eve that hearing it created a Pavlovian response: time to start cleaning up, time to send guests home, time to end the celebration and begin the transition back to ordinary life. Families who'd watched Guy Lombardo felt a sense of completion that families who'd watched Dick Clark didn't experience. The waltz provided closure and transition, a gentle ending that prepared everyone for the party's conclusion. Dick Clark's broadcast ended with more energy and less finality, leaving viewers somewhat adrift without the clear signal that the evening was over. The Guy Lombardo final waltz represented everything that would disappear from American celebration culture: formality, ballroom dancing skills, cross-generational entertainment, and the belief that elegance and sophistication mattered more than youth and energy. When Guy Lombardo died in 1977, the tradition began its decline, and by the 1980s, Dick Clark had won the cultural battle for New Year's Eve television dominance. This is the tradition that defined how younger families and teenagers experienced New Year's Eve, and it revealed how celebrity culture was beginning to reshape American celebration. Families watching Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve spent the evening analyzing and discussing the celebrity interviews that punctuated the broadcast. This commentary tradition turned passive television watching into active engagement and created shared experience that bonded viewers through collective judgment of famous people. Families developed running commentary. She's definitely drunk. He's freezing but trying to act like he's not. That interview made no sense. Did you see how Dick Clark tried to end that quickly? This shared analysis created bonding as family members competed to make the funniest observations and demonstrated their sophistication about celebrity culture. Teenagers particularly engaged with the celebrity interviews because they recognized the musicians and actors while their parents often didn't. This knowledge gap created rare moments where teenagers possessed cultural information their parents lacked, temporarily inverting the usual family hierarchy and allowing teens to educate rather than be educated. Celebrities who were obviously intoxicated or behaving inappropriately created entertainment rather than scandal, with viewers laughing at their antics rather than being shocked. This casual attitude toward public drunkenness would shift in coming decades as celebrity culture became more managed and controlled. Dick Clark himself became the subject of analysis and commentary. Families discussed how he never seemed to age, how he maintained enthusiasm despite hosting for hours in freezing weather, how he managed awkward situations with grace. This analysis of the host, rather than just the content, revealed how television personalities were becoming quasi-family members who viewers felt they knew intimately. The tradition created family memories of specific celebrity moments: the year someone fell on stage, the year an interview went hilariously wrong, the year a musician was so drunk they couldn't perform. These shared memories became reference points that families returned to in subsequent years. Remember when? These callbacks created family lore that connected New Year's celebrations across multiple years. The Dick Clark celebrity interview analysis represented the future of American celebration, mediated through television, focused on celebrity culture, emphasizing entertainment over elegance, and creating national shared experience that transcended local traditions. This future would fully arrive in the 1980s and beyond, but in the 1970s it was still competing with older celebration models like Guy Lombardo's formal elegance. Families negotiated who would clean up immediately after midnight versus who would clean up the next morning, creating a division of labor that revealed family dynamics and values about responsibility and celebration. This delegation tradition prevented the exhausted host from bearing the entire cleanup burden while teaching children about shared responsibility. The negotiation happened around 12:30 a.m. as the party began winding down and guests began gathering coats and saying goodbyes. Mothers typically wanted to clean immediately, unable to go to bed knowing the house was a mess, with food drying on plates and spills becoming permanent stains. Fathers typically wanted to leave everything until morning, arguing that everyone was too tired to clean effectively and that nothing would spoil overnight anyway. This gender divide reflected 1970s assumptions about who bore responsibility for household cleanliness and whose comfort mattered most in decisions about domestic labor. The compromise usually involved doing minimal cleanup, throwing away obvious trash, putting away perishable food that might spoil, wiping down surfaces that would be harder to clean if left overnight, while leaving deeper cleaning for the next day. This middle ground satisfied mothers' need for basic order, while respecting fathers' desire not to spend an hour cleaning at 1 a.m. when everyone was exhausted from celebration. Children were assigned specific tasks appropriate to their ages and capabilities, gathering used cups and plates from around the house, taking out trash bags to the curb, putting away noisemakers and party favors. These assignments taught that celebration came with cleanup obligations, that everyone who enjoyed the party had to contribute to restoration, and that responsibility didn't end when the fun ended. Older children helped with dishes, while younger children picked up decorations and straightened furniture. The negotiation itself was part of the tradition, with each family developing its own patterns and expectations about who did what and when. Some families always cleaned immediately, regardless of the hour, because that's what grandmother had done. Others always left everything until morning because that's what felt right to them. Most families fell somewhere in between, adjusting based on how messy the party was and how tired everyone felt. The negotiation revealed that even celebration required planning for its aftermath, that different family members had different tolerance for mess and different ideas about when tasks should be completed, and that compromise was essential for maintaining household harmony. It showed children that adults didn't always agree about the right way to handle situations, that negotiation was normal part of family life, and that finding middle ground was more important than one person getting their way completely. This is the final tradition, the one that closed the evening for families who understood that something important was ending even as they celebrated new beginnings. Even families who'd watched Dick Clark all evening often switched to Guy Lombardo for the final few minutes of his broadcast, creating a tribute moment that honored the tradition their parents and grandparents had followed. This cross-generational gesture acknowledged that celebration styles were changing, but that respect for the past mattered. The tribute moment happened around 12:45 a.m., after the excitement of midnight had passed and the party was winding down. Someone would suggest switching channels just to see what Guy Lombardo is doing, and the family would watch the final waltz and sign-off together. This moment created poignancy because everyone sensed that Guy Lombardo's style of celebration was becoming obsolete. The formal elegance, the ballroom dancing, the sophisticated atmosphere, all of it seemed to belong to a different era. But watching together created connection to that era and to the family members who'd celebrated that way. Grandparents particularly appreciated the tribute moment because it validated their celebration style and showed that younger family members respected tradition even if they didn't fully embrace it. The few minutes of watching Guy Lombardo became a gift from younger generations to older ones, an acknowledgement that the past mattered even as everyone moved toward a different future. When Guy Lombardo died in 1977, the tribute moment became even more poignant for the remaining years of the decade. Families watching his final broadcasts knew they were witnessing the end of an era, that future New Year's Eves would be different, and that something valuable was being lost even as something new emerged. The Guy Lombardo tribute moment represented everything about 1970s New Year's Eve traditions: the tension between old and new, the respect for the past combined with embrace of the future, the recognition that celebration styles reveal values and identities, and the understanding that how we mark time's passage says something important about who we are. Which of these 30 New Year's Eve traditions did your family practice in the 1970s? Comment the tradition name and your state. I'm mapping where these celebration rituals persisted longest and which regions abandoned them first as television replaced community-based celebration. If you made it through all 30 traditions, you understand that 1970s families weren't just having parties. They were maintaining elaborate ritual systems that required afternoon preparation, neighborhood coordination, and commitment to formality that modern celebration has abandoned. They created structured celebration that taught children about planning, responsibility, community obligation, and the belief that important occasions warranted special effort. They mastered coordination that required landline phones and handwritten lists rather than group texts and shared calendars. They navigated the Guy Lombardo versus Dick Clark divide that revealed family values about tradition versus modernity. They organized progressive dinners requiring 6 households to synchronize timing perfectly. They created fake countdowns for young children while preparing for real midnight celebration. They assembled snack tables following unwritten rules about appropriate foods. They coordinated neighborhood security so everyone could party safely. They wrote resolutions and read them aloud, creating public accountability that made goals harder to abandon.